Hello and welcome to the Toffee Blues, your source for all things Everton, and welcome back to the Toffee Blues Podcast. Yeah, it's been a bit of a I can't quite say a quiet week, but there's not a game to talk about like in recent memory, but a lot of off the field stuff has been happening, and of course Toffees are back in action this weekend. So yeah, plenty to dive into. I'm joined with Harry again as ever. Hope you're doing well, my mate.
Yeah, all good, man. All good. Thanks for having me back again. Been a quiet one, but I feel like I just put in the preview actually ahead of the Wolves game, which is available now to go and read and digest ahead of the Wolves game tomorrow night. It's just a selfless plug there. But I did say in the preview, I feel like whilst it's been really quiet and quite funny to see a lot of the UAE content that's been coming out on the YouTube channel, which has been quite nice and refreshing, but there's still been quite a lot going on off the pitch back here on Merseyside as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Though. As I say, I think for the players, it's probably been quite relaxing, but for pretty much everyone else involved with the club, it's been pretty hectic, and yeah, there's clearly a lot of change going on. But yeah, I mean, just starting with the lack of football. I think in recent seasons, whenever we've been given like a weekend off. It's felt like, oh, thank God! Like it's a weekend that Everton can't ruin, and you can just enjoy yourself and not have to think about it at all. And yeah, I don't know, this weekend felt very different for the first time in a while. I felt a bit, I didn't really know what to do with myself, if you know what I mean. It felt a bit
Yeah.
like it felt a bit wrong, really, not having any footballs to watch. I imagine you felt the same.
Yeah, and you know what? I think it's Sean. I was in the sort of two minds about it really. It was nice to have a bit of a break. I think there was elements in that Brentford game, wasn't there, of just sort of limping across the finish line and very kind of wounded yet valiant efforts from a lot of players that just needed that break. And we talked about that, and I know that's generally reflecting the overall sentiment of the fan base that the break was needed, and a lot of excitement now about what it'll be like in the Wolves game, which I know we'll come on to. But David Moyes having like a full 10 days of training with the players, the longest stretch he's had since he came back to the club. And I think there was a lot of reason to be quite optimistic about that. And I think there was an element of that break was needed for the players more than anyone, because I think for us fans, we was just in delirium of this 7 games unbeaten. We've sung so many players' praises and the club's praises overall on this podcast, certainly over the last month. And I think when it's going well, you kind of never want it to end. And I think there might just be a few kind of nerves about, oh, the momentum now might have stopped with this 10-day break. So that's the only reservation I have about it. And it was, I guess, last weekend with it being the FA Cup games, and you kind of looked at that and thought, the only kind of shortfall for David Moyes since coming back, apart from that Villa game, was obviously the cup game and disappointing to go out in the cup quite early. But yeah, we got to focus on what we got to focus on. It felt like a long weekend, but it's great to hear that, or it's great to know, sorry, that the Toffees are back tomorrow at the time that we're recording this.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, you spoke about just how many of the players and of course the manager have been having their praise sung by the fans. But of course, for once that's been recognised by the league as a whole. Really, have we ever had nominations in all three categories for like these monthly competitions before? If we
I
have,
don't
I
think
can't
so.
remember it. You're going back
Yeah.
a long time. But yeah, obviously Moyes Manager of the Month, Beto Player of the Month, and Tarkowski Goal of the Month. All those nominations. I can't quite remember that Tarkowski goal, but
No, 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 it doesn't ring a bell, does it? I have to go back and
yeah,
watch it another 1,000 times just to commit it to memory.
That's literally just burned into our memories. But yeah, like I say, it's good to see, isn't it? These players getting recognised, and I've had colleagues at work saying like, can't believe the turnaround in
Yeah.
fortunes of Beto, like in particular, suddenly turning into a goal machine, really. And as you say, you do really hope that this hasn't halted any of the momentum for these players, and instead it's just got spirits even higher. Just a few days off, as you say, in the sun. Team bonding and all of that, and that actually you imagine they're like chomping at the bit now, ready to just go again and get some more wins under the belt. You'd like to think, wouldn't you?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And I think on the nominations as well, I think without being too tinfoil hat and the world is against Everton, which I know we can be at times as a fan base, I think it's been incredibly hard to ignore. I think it would have been incredibly harsh for David Moyes to not receive a nomination. You know, whether he goes on to win it is it's in the hands of the public, isn't it, pretty much? So, you know, it depends on how many Evertonians have clicked that link and how many burner phones have been used in this experience. But I do really feel like it would have been incredibly harsh on David Moyes to come in and not be nominated for February. I think the same has to be said for Beto as well. You know, we said 5 in 4 in Feb. Like it's those stats. He is statistically the best striker in the Premier League for February. So therefore, he probably should win that award again. Whether he does is a different thing. But I mean, you talk about when was the last time we had nominations in all three categories. I mean, when was the last time we had a nomination in one category in recent memory, you know? And I know don't want to take digs at the previous administration or what we went through last season because we're moving forward and looking up, but it is just nice and refreshing to see that, you know, it harks back to Ancelotti and Calvert-Lewin winning it, doing the double, which was a weird thing to say associated to Everton, but getting those two awards during those awful pandemic years. But it's just nice. It's refreshing, and it's a reflection of the positivity that I know is kind of exuding out of our fan base at the moment. So long may that continue. We hope that's not a one-off.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, I think one player who I think is still maybe dividing opinion a little bit in recent weeks is Doucouré. And of course, you know, the news came out this week that we were apparently yes, it was very cleverly worded, wasn't it? How it was said about how we're not triggering the 1 year
Yeah,
extension, not we're letting him go. We're not keeping him on the same deal next season, which basically makes it seem like it's up to the player now. It's like
yeah,
if you want to stay, you're gonna have to take a lower wage. What is he? He's 32 now. We're
mhm,
trying to obviously, we want to have a bit more of a tighter wage, structure. This is, you're still going back to the Mashiri chucking money about era.
yeah,
That is very much what Doucouré's contract represents. Um, but I'd like to think that the majority of Evertonians would be in favour of keeping him, especially if it's on a lower wage. Um, I think, I completely understand the frustration he brings. He's he's definitely not one of our better on the ball players, but we do look a very different side when he's not in it. I think,
yeah,
I don't think that's a coincidence. And you have the whole stat about, I think we've only won 4 games when he's not been involved. And he's
yeah,
been here 5 years now. If he's not been involved at all, we've only won 4 games since he joined the club. It's an absolutely mental statistic, and it really does show that he's very important to how we play. So, and with quite a big summer ahead, a lot of other players are probably going to be leaving. You just think keeping someone like the Core surely just solves a lot more issues than that. I imagine you
yeah.
think it similarly.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. I think I read that article, that statement from the club in the same way as well, that it wasn't we were letting him go, because why would you announce that right now? I think it was this sort of declaration of we've got a lot of players here that, and we talked about this on the last pod, didn't we? Like there's a lot of players out of contract. There's a lot of this, do we keep them? The negotiation that goes alongside that. And I think Doucouré does have a decision to make. You know, he has been living on a high wage for an Everton footballer over the last few seasons. He is of an age now where you would expect if he went to another club, he probably wouldn't be guaranteed that bump in salary that footballers expect when they leave on a free transfer. I think if you conversely look at Dominic Calvert-Lewin's contract situation, he's possibly looking at getting maybe double his salary at another club because he's a free agent. He's still relatively young as an English striker. But I think for Doucouré, it's slightly different. I think he will now be tested on how much he's prepared to compromise salary wise versus what other offers are out there. But I think to go back to that stat you mentioned about him as a player and how he improves the squad and statistically how he kind of drives us to better results. I mean, we can't keep looking at every kind of 30 plus player as the long-term solution to our problems. I think he is good for another season, which is why I think it's important they keep him. But ultimately, I actually admire this approach from the club that we're not going to just trigger something. That would be the easy option, pay him that salary as a 32-year-old. It's not where the money needs to be spent. And it just again it feels to me like a natural side effect of Moyes coming back. I know we'll talk about some of the other news that's come out of the club in the last couple of days in a moment, but it feels like a real side effect of Moyes coming back that we're not just going to pay over the odds for players, that there is going to be negotiation, that we aren't just going to be taken for a ride. And I do hope Doucouré stays because I think on his day he's a great player, and I think we'd find it hard to find a like for like replacement. It's the same thing the other lot across the park are going through, right? We don't want to pay Mo Salah all this money, but are you going to find someone as good as Mo Salah who then has less money? Like probably not. So then do you keep him? And I think to a lesser extent, that's our argument here with Doucouré. Is it going to cost us more to go and get someone else to do that role?
Yeah, like I say, obviously we're all aware that there's going to be a lot of positions we're probably going to need, new faces in for this summer based on how many people are going to be leaving. Um,
Yeah.
and you just imagine that midfield, obviously Gay and Decore are in very similar boats at the moment. It's still unsure what's going to be happening with Idrissa Gay, but I can't really imagine a world where he's not here next season. I think.
Yeah, me
And
neither.
with other positions needing to be prioritised this summer, and as you mentioned, it does just make sense, I think, just to keep the core and Gay in for one more year and just spend that whole year basically trying to find
Yeah.
the players that can do what they do because there's not many. Idrissa Gay in particular, it's a very rare type of player, and we've already tried to replace him a few years ago and ended up replacing him with him again just 3 years
Yeah.
down the line. So yeah, it's not going to be an easy task, and yeah, like I say, I think obviously age is not on either of them two side, but
No.
while other positions will have to be prioritised this summer. I think it definitely makes sense to be keeping hold of them. So I'd imagine that's how it's gonna go. Um, Obviously, there's a little bit of confusion over who's actually making this decision on these
Yeah,
decisions,
true.
these decisions as a whole. Obviously, it's now been announced about there's going to be a bit of a reshuffle this summer. The recruitment team or the sporting leadership team, I think the phrasing is going to be expanded this summer. Obviously, we were kind of aware that it looked like it was Farewell was going to be out the door this summer. That's now been confirmed.
Yeah.
And there's rumours that Rob Newman, who works with Moyes at West Ham, is possibly going to be coming in as I think his title was head of recruitment at West Ham. I imagine he'll be doing something quite similar there. David Weir, of course, has been obviously being linked with Everton and the connection he has with Moyes, of course, a former captain. He's technical director at Brighton. So, there's all these new roles that we're not
Yeah.
really that used to yet that we're probably going to be having this summer and are probably going to be having to get used to. So, it's something that's divided opinion again, I'd say. I think. It's a little concerning. I look at what United have been doing the last few years, and obviously bringing in Dan Ashworth this summer, and then him leaving a
Yeah.
few months down the line, and all the reports seem to be that was mainly over just too many hands in like getting involved and butting heads and it not working in a coherent system. Obviously, pretty much everything has been down to Felwell or the director of football, whoever that may be, since Mashiri came in and we introduced that role. This is going to be a little bit different. Um,
Mm.
and obviously, there's an idea that Moyes is going to be getting a little more involved now, which obviously, we know from his first time here just how good an eye he has for a player and his recruitment and not paying over the odds and that. But this is a very different game now to what Everton were like back then, and obviously that's not quite how it operated at West Ham. So yeah, there's a lot of question marks going on, and yeah, I don't know what would you make of all that spiel, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to get into, isn't there? And we could probably do a whole podcast just on the stuff that got announced earlier today and the potential announcements that seem to be coming. I mean, it feels to me like the Friedkin group. I nearly said the Thelwell group, which I don't know what kind of consortium that would be. But yeah, the Friedkin group. I think it's starting to show signs of life. I think there's been some criticism maybe from our fan base that they've been very quiet. They've not been communicative since that initial statement when they took over. They maybe had a couple of sound bites when Moyes was reappointed, but they haven't done a lot. And now it feels like they're coming to life. There's rumblings, there's movement. I think on Thelwell, my initial feeling was, wow, there's another guy there whose book I'm gonna read in 2 years' time, alongside Deitch when they put out their kind of Everton years memoirs, because I think there's a lot of things there that I would really like to hear Thelwell's kind of unedited take on. I think you have to give him the respect of whatever you make of his signings, he's done an incredible job in incredible circumstances. I don't think by any means being the director of football when you've got PSR regulations hanging over your head and points deductions and having to sell your best players. And I think there's a lot there. We apply that same logic to the manager situation, of course, as well. But I think on Thelwell, like you have to give him credit. I think on what's being decided now about whether we need a director of football or not, I think David Moyes has earned the right to call his shot. And we don't know that this is David Moyes that has called this shot, but I think David Moyes has earned the right to have whatever infrastructure at Everton Football Club he feels Everton Football Club needs to succeed. I think he shows us game in, game out, every time he speaks publicly about Everton, that he knows Everton, he gets Everton, and he genuinely wants the best for the future of Everton, not the future of David Moyes. And I think some of this panic from fans is, oh, well, it's David Moyes baking himself into the future of this club. I mean, we just said the same thing about some of the players. David Moyes is not the long-term solution to the success of Everton Football Club. But if he leaves us in half the state that he left us the first time he went away, I think we're in a much stronger position to then build on that now with new owners than we were when he went to Man United 11 years ago. So I'm prepared to trust the process. I'm prepared to welcome anybody that TFG or Moyes think is the right player for this club. Almost kind of blind faith because the results on the pitch have allowed that. And actually, like, I want to see what David Moyes is like with money. We didn't see that the first 11 years he was here. So I think it would be good to see. And, the guy that he's going to potentially bring in that he had at West Ham was there at Man City in the kind of early stages of Man City having wealth. So I think there's enough there, enough positive signs to show they are genuinely trying to find a way that works for Everton. And you mentioned Man United, like the director of football thing's not worked for them. And it's not worked for several other clubs as well across Europe's big leagues. You don't need it. Not every club has to follow the same approach. So I think it's right until it's wrong for
Mm.
me.
Yeah, and like I say, it's looking quite similar to how it worked at West Ham. And you say about Moyes never had much money to spend at Everton, but he did at West Ham.
Yeah.
And I think if you break down West Ham's recruitment when Moyes was there, I don't know. It's a bit 50-50, isn't it? Some signings were very good, some not so great, and it's unclear just how responsible Moyes was for all of that. As I say, it's a
Yeah.
big wider team. But I've seen a lot of people saying like, oh, he's just turning us into the new West Ham, and I'm just like, well, is that bad a thing? He had West Ham consistently in like the top six, top seven, and won them a European trophy. And he came in when they were, where we are right now, basically just
Yeah.
above the drop zone. And in just a few years' time, he got them to that position. Like, sign me up. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and obviously, people say it'll be about the status of a club like West Ham, who, it's still, no disrespect to West Ham, are still a very big institution, but we'd like to consider ourselves at least, probably a tier higher in terms of the whole bigness argument that is just a never-ending cycle of
That, yeah,
whatever.
goes
But
on.
um, but yeah, so and as you say, Moyes absolutely has the best interests of the club at heart, and as you say, if this is genuinely what he thinks will work best for Everton, then we've got to trust that. But more than
Yeah.
anybody, you've got to trust Moyes' judgment, when it comes to Everton, I think. Um,
Yeah. I
so
think to flip the West Ham thing on its head, by the way, people saying, oh, is Moyes trying to make Everton the next West Ham? I think when he went into West Ham, there were people that looked at that and thought, oh, he's done with West Ham what he did with Everton. And I think the only time he went a step further was that he had a little bit more money and he got them to a European final and they won that final. And fair play to him. And like you rightly said, sign me up. Like I'd sign up if he was trying to turn us into the next Brighton or Brentford or this bigness argument is it's based on history and it's based on how many years you've been as a club. And I think really I don't care who we're trying to model ourselves on as long as we're trying to model ourselves on a club that isn't constantly fighting relegation, constantly having to sell best players and constantly bringing in 38-year-old free agents. Like for me, I'm quite content with whatever he's trying to do. If that's West Ham or that's how he was 11 years ago, I just think we've got to embrace it. It's and also we know this as a fan base or in any walk of life, you're never going to please everybody. For every argument, there's going to be a counter argument, and everyone's valid to feel how they want to feel about this. I get there's a lot of trauma around this football club over the last 11 years. People have seen things they didn't want to see, felt things they didn't want to feel. So ultimately, I get why we're tentative. But I think that if you just look at Moyes, every time Moyes speaks, I just feel blindly optimistic again, which I love because God Almighty was that different under the previous manager. So I just like the fact that he leads me to believe in what he believes in. And so let's just see what happens. It's going to be a busy few months. Even after the season ends, it'll be a huge few months. Let's see what happens. Let's try and be excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, we've been so badly treated over the years that it's impossible for you to just blindly follow anything and just
Yeah.
say, yeah, this is going to work for us absolutely. But it does feel a little bit different, all of this to me. And as you say, I think Moyes does play a huge part in that because he's got the experience behind him now. He's proved what he's capable of, and he's absolutely invested in the club. So yeah, it's of the any of the leaders we could have, he's definitely one of the better ones. So absolutely.
For sure. Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
yeah, like I say, I think we'll leave the off the field things, to put that to one side for now, and
Yeah.
move on to what we're a lot better at talking about. I think the clearer stuff, much easier stuff to talk about, I guess. And looking ahead to this match on Saturday, at a really stupid kickoff time, one of these
Oh,
daft
don't. Yeah.
8 p.m. Saturday ones, absolute ball ache for anyone traveling down there.
Ridiculous.
You have my sympathies. Um, but yeah, hopefully it's more of the same that we were seeing before this mini break we've had. Obviously Wolves had Wolves have sort of turned things around a little bit under Pereira.
Yeah.
I think they've built themselves a 5 point gap, ahead of the drop. I'd like to think now they'll have enough to stay up. And Vitor Pereira, who is another dark mini chapter
Yeah.
in our recent history. Things could be very different right now, when it comes to that guy. But yeah, he's come in and sort of turned things around a little bit for Wolves, but nevertheless, we've got to be strong favourites for this one, haven't we? And that's not necessarily a good thing when it comes to Everton,
Yeah.
but hopefully that's another thing that's part of the past, and that's something that the players can relish a little bit. I think a lot of these games, in recent weeks where we managed to get a decent result, there's always been that fear in the back of the mind that this team are
Mm.
very good, and if they show up, they'll give us a hard game. Whereas I think we've got to believe that we're better than Wolves, and as long as we play our way, we should be able to deal with anything they throw at us, especially with them missing Cunha, of course.
Yeah,
So
that's the big one, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, how are you feeling ahead of this game?
I mean, Wolves are a bit of a bogey team for Everton, aren't they? I think aside from earlier this season, where us arguably at our worst and them arguably at theirs, we kind of somehow failed our way to a 4-0 win. I don't think we were particularly good in that game, but the scoreline was the scoreline. But I think prior to that, we'd not beat. I think we'd only beaten Wolves once since they came back to the Premier League, or twice since they came back to the Premier League. I think I'm right in saying that. I should know. I was looking at the stats earlier, but brain like a sieve. So I think they've definitely been our bogey team in recent years. They've really hammered us a lot of the time. We've had some really big defeats to Wolves and never relish a trip trip to Wolves and never really relished them coming to Goodison. Obviously, we've done half the job this season. You're right. We have to be considered strong favourites. I think form and history goes out the window with the run that Everton are on at the moment. It's almost now with this one, you look at it and go, it was a bit like Brentford. It'd be disappointing if the undefeated streak ended here. Like I think if it had have ended against Liverpool, or even if it had have ended against Man United, regardless of what you think of either of those clubs, you'd have looked at that and gone, okay, fair enough, they have our number. But you're looking at Wolves where they are in the league. I'd like to think this would be very similar to the Leicester game. I'd like to just think that we'd be comfortable, in control, clinical. I think that was what was missing from Brentford was that degree of being clinical. And I think given the fixtures we've got coming up after West Ham, before we then get to the final three games of the season, that's for another pod. But I think Moyes is going to want us to get as close to 40 points now before we head into that second Merseyside derby. I think we really need to get a couple of wins now in the next two. So I think with that in mind, I would expect us to win, but I just don't know if it's as comfortable as we think it's going to maybe be.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, it is still it's an odd one because you'd like to think we still have the momentum a little bit. Obviously, we talked a bit before about how this break might disrupt things a little bit, but obviously
Yeah.
it's a very weird month we've got coming up, isn't it? I think it is literally just Wolves and West Ham, and then
Yeah.
that tricky April starts again after like a 2 week international break, a proper break,
Yeah.
where it's there is definitely going to be rushiness after that. But yeah, like you say, Wolves is, again, no disrespect to Wolves, it's one of the easier fixtures on paper at that in the current Premier League. And then you look at West Ham next week at Goodison, of course, where we're looking a lot stronger than,
Yeah.
already transforming Goodison into a fortress again before it goes in the summer, but
Yeah.
regardless of the whole figurative argument there. But West Ham in particular, he'll really want to. He'll be really up for that one. You'd imagine
Of course he
Moyes would
will.
he?
Yeah, of
He'll
course
be
he will.
really wanting to prove a point to those fans that I'll go as far to say has pretty much hounded him out, and I think played a big part in the owners deciding to cut ties with him. I think it was a bit of a mutual decision. Maybe Moyes felt he'd taken the club as far as he could in terms of what the fans wanted, but there was a lot of very disrespectful stuff I saw from West Ham fans. Based on the fact it was
Agreed.
the season after they just won a European
Yeah.
trophy.
Absolutely
Um,
wild, right? Absolutely wild. And I think you're right. He will be well up for it. I think if you my challenge to Everton really, given the run that we've got between now and the end of the season, is got to beat Wolves, got to beat Ipswich, got to beat Southampton. And the rest is then free hits, I
mm,
think. But like you say, he'll be well up for West Ham. I don't think it's the thing with Wolves and West Ham, like neither of them have had the same like managerial bounce that we had under Moyes, really. I think Pereira's like he's had a bit of an influence and he's got, I mean, that result against Villa was a big one for them at home, obviously with Villa where they are in the league. And I know West Ham have had one or two decent wins, but ultimately they've not had that consistency that Everton have had or that kind of resilience to avoid defeat. So if you can come out of those two games relatively unscathed and then go into that international break, I think we're sort of there and done by the time we come back after the international break anyway.
yeah, I agree. So yeah, in terms of Wolves, can I get a prediction out of you?
I said on the preview, I said 2-0 Everton, and I'm going to stick to that. I think we're long overdue, or maybe not long overdue, but we're certainly overdue another clean sheet. I'd like to see Pickford. I always like it when we get clean sheets because I like to see Pickford get his plaudits. Um, I also, with Alisson being called the best goalkeeper in the world at the moment as well, and it riles me. So I'd like another clean sheet, and I'll back Beto to get another goal. I think that'll be him now. I think, but Brentford was probably a game too much for him. But I think after the break, he'll want to make amends for that one. So yeah, I'd go for Beto to get a goal. And I also boldly think that Lindstrom might actually get on the score sheet this time. So 2-0 Beto and Lindstrom. And do you know what? I'd also go as far as to predict Wolves won't finish with 11 men on the pitch because there's something about their setup at the moment. They quite like a red card, don't they? So I think that'll also happen.
Yeah, okay. Like I say, I think I've got 2-1 in my head. I have the feeling it's going to be a bit of a gritty game, bit of an ugly
Yeah.
one that we might have to slug out a little bit. But
Mm.
I'd like to think now that we've got that hunger and that drive to come out on top. I've been backing Lindstrom to score for weeks. I'm going to stop, and hopefully it means he'll actually score. But oh my God, I was literally just thinking in my head. I reckon so and so was going to score. Who the hell was I thinking of? It's slipped right out of my mind.
It wasn't
Um,
Jack Harrison, was it?
Decore. It was
Oh, there
Decore.
you go.
I think, given the news in the last few days,
Yeah.
I just have to feeling Decore might pop up with the winner. And to anyone saying, "Oh, good decision about not let's let him go in the summer," he might maybe turn a few heads a little bit in terms of that one. So yeah, hopefully anyway that'll be how it goes. So yeah, I think that's all the talking points now. We'll finish off as we usually do with a lineup quiz, and yeah, it's you asking me this week, isn't it? So
I'm really
I'm
excited for this one.
yeah,
Really
I've
excited.
put I've put you on the spot quite a few times in the last few weeks, so now the tables have
Revenge.
turned.
I've picked a really good one actually. One of my favorite wins over Wolves at Molineux this one. If we go back to the 9th of April 2011, which I appreciate was a long time ago, but I weirdly remember this this one really well. And it's one of the previous David Moyes wins over Wolves, which is why I've gone back to it. So yeah, we're at Molineux on the 9th of April 2011, and we're going to hand over to you now to try and guess who's in the starting 11.
Yeah, right, okay. So yeah, so this is very much my pomp to be fair. Like I said, it's the first few
Nice.
years of me watching Everton, I was obsessive. So I remember all the goal scorers, so that's a good start. So you have
Yeah.
Jermaine Beckford, then Phil Neville, uh,
Yeah.
and Diniar Bilyaletdinov, and it was one of those where they kind of just ramped up in quality. A real nice strike from Neville, and then
Yeah.
Bilyaletdinov just pops up with a screamer few minutes later and steals all the headlines. Um, so yeah, obviously Tim Howard in goal is
Yeah.
pretty much a standard. Leighton Baines at left back.
Correct. Yeah.
Um, yes, Phil Neville was at right back, but I'm not sure.
Phil,
Um,
Phil Neville played, and obviously you've already
yeah, yeah,
named him
yeah.
as
So I'm
a
just I'm
goal
just trying
scorer.
to just trying to visualize the defense in my head.
Yeah.
So I'll say Distan,
Distan did play. Yeah.
okay, and it's either Heiting or Jagielka. I'll say Jagielka at the
Yeah. That's
back,
also
okay.
correct. Yeah.
Um, so then, yeah, obviously Billy Letdinoff on the left. Then I think this used to be when Osman played behind Beckford. So I'll say Osman started.
Osman did start. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, this is a weird one. I have the feeling Cahill didn't play because Neville punched the flag. And I think he punched the flag because Cahill wasn't playing. So I'm going to say Cahill's not in the team,
Yeah. That's
which
also
means,
correct for what's
which, m-
that's worth.
yeah, which means the midfield would have been Arteta.
No, and he actually looking at this, he wasn't even on the bench. I think
He
this was when he was injured as well.
must have
So I
been
think,
injured.
yeah,
Okay.
so that's one life down. You got two remaining.
Okay. Fellaini.
I'm just having a look here. Do you know what? No, this was during
Oh,
the real like injury hit spell. So again, not even on the bench for Laney.
okay. I reckon that means that Heitinger was in midfield.
Well, yeah, well adjusted. Yeah,
Yeah.
Heitinger was definitely in midfield for that one.
And if there's no Arteta, there's no Fellaini, there's no Cahill, that'll be, oh my God, but that'll have been Rodwell.
No, and
Oh,
he
bloody
wasn't on the
hell.
bench either. He wasn't on the
Jesus, man.
bench either.
Who the hell was that
Um,
other midfielder?
So do you know what I think you adjusted really well to Heitinger being in midfield. He wouldn't have been the only defender playing there because Neville would have played in midfield
Oh,
for
of
that one,
course he was,
and
yeah.
Tony Hibbert would have started at right back.
Right.
And the only one that you missed was my good friend Magai Gay, Adrissa's non-relative.
Wow. I don't think I would have got that. I think I would have had Coleman on the right mid as a guest. But my guy Gay, bloody hell, I didn't realize he was playing for us at that point. I know we brought him in that season.
Yeah.
But
We've got a, do you want to know the bench here is absolutely incredible as well? Because we
so this
we
is what I
said it,
mean. This is
yeah,
like this is what Moyes has always done. You look at our team now
yeah,
and all these injuries. Look at the state of this squad. We're missing
I
all our best
know,
players, and we're
I
still
know.
battling Wolves. It's crazy.
It was brilliant. I mean, you're looking at this. One thing would be said here that we had three strikers on the bench for that win against Wolves, but those three strikers were Victor Anichebe, who came on for Magai Gay at some point in that game. Apostolos Velios, who's another sort of cult hero at Everton, came on for Beckford, and Conor McElhenney didn't get on the pitch, but he was the third striker. Adam Forshaw was the third substitute in that one. He came on for Billy Letdinoff. I don't know why I
Wow.
made myself say his name. And then elsewhere on the bench, Mustafa, formerly of Arsenal, of course,
Wow.
back when in his academy days. And then Jan Mucha. We said we were going to do a pod on reserve goalkeepers at some point. He would be up there for me. And then a young lad whose name I'm not going to try and butcher, but I don't even remember him as an Everton player. So very interesting.
All right, I'll look that one up afterwards. Then I won't subject you to trying to tell me who that was. Wow. Ah, I'm annoyed. I thought I was going to get that. All those injuries have really scuppered me there. But well. But yeah, obviously, always great to end with a bit of fun like that. And yeah, I always say it, but yeah, we definitely take 3-0 on Saturday. And
Absolutely.
a screamer from. Who would the Neville equivalent be? I don't know. Ashley Young, maybe.
Yeah,
I
I'd
don't
take
know.
an Ashley Young screamer.
Rolling
Yeah.
back the years. Yeah. So, but yeah, they'll see. But yeah, thank you again very much for joining me, Harry. It's
Yeah,
it's
cheers, mate.
always a pleasure to have you on. Um, Speaking about all sorts, all this off the field stuff that 10 years ago no one would have cared about, but it's suddenly all important. But yeah, please leave a like if you enjoyed. Comment below, giving your thoughts ahead of the Wolves game and your thoughts on the whole leadership team news that's been announced. And subscribe to the Toffee Blues channel for more Everton content. And we will see you in the next video. Up the Toffees.